So for more insight this evening on the reality behind the Lockerbie bombing, we speak to Susan Lindauer, who's a former CIA agent who's calling in from the United States. Hi, Susan, and welcome to the Politics Show.
Hello, Tony. It's great to be on with you. People may say to themselves, why does Lockerbie matter now? Because it's 25 years old. But there is a very important reason, and that is the CIA continues to control and dominate the heroin and opium trade. We know that and it's very disconcerting, and if we don't confront this, it will continue until we do.
Okay, what evidence have you got, Susan, for that?
Well, we know that American soldiers are coming back from Afghanistan furiously unhappy that they've been posted to guard poppy fields, and that we know that this is becoming a critical financial mechanism for the black budgets in the United States. And we know that essentially the CIA trafficking is putting the CIA in the drug lord business, and the CIA may be the drug kingpin.
Okay, so what do you mean by the black budget?
Well, the black budgets are the operational monies for Afghanistan, for Syria, for training and creating the militancy groups that we now know as Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra, the Free Syrian Army, operations all through the world. But it is a point of it is black. It means it's off the books. The Senate Intelligence Committee has passed a law declaring that black budget monies must never be audited by Congress. The Congress actually passed a law saying that it would be illegal to inform Congress of the uses of the money, the quantities of the money, and that Congress must never, by law, must not be held accountable for what the black budgets are used for.
Okay, before we get into Lockerbie, Susan, just tell us your story, because you had a bit of a rough ride as someone who'd been working for the CIA, didn't you?
Well, my background is very important on Libya. I was the chief CIA asset covering Iraq and Libya from 1995 to 2003. I covered the embassies as a back channel in New York at the United Nations. So I was meeting about every 3 weeks with Iraqi and Libyan diplomats. I am the one who started the Lockerbie negotiations for the handover of the 2 Libyans for trial. And I can tell you from my own direct personal knowledge and my own direct involvement that the very first conversations with the Libyan diplomats stated up front, because I'm the one who said it, I'm the one who did it. We said up front, we know that you are innocent. We know that Libya had nothing to do with this trial. The diplomat was floored. He said, he was like, oh, thank you, CIA. He laughed. He was amazed. But I am a brutally honest messenger. I'll tell you the truth, and it's not going to be watered down. It's not going to be prettied up. It's going to be direct, because that's how I am as a person. And I just told them, we know you did not do this. The American families of Lockerbie, more than the Scottish families, but the American families, are demanding a trial. The only way we are ever going to convince them of Libya's innocence is if we show them a trial where the evidence is presented, that the trial will satiate their need for justice, and then they're going to be confronted with the fact that all the evidence points somewhere else. And if they have any shred of paternal filial decency, they're going to want to know who really did it. Once we show them that this is impossible, the scenario that they have latched on psychologically, the psychological problem was that the families were bitterly attached to the Libyan story, and they wanted it so badly, and it's just not true. They are innocent. McGrahy was an innocent man. I am so grateful that that the Prime Minister of England let him go free, because he never deserved that. I was so relieved when FEMA, the other Libya, and I'm the one who did the negotiations for the trial. I'm the one who had to persuade Libya to do this. And I'm telling you that I was so grateful and so pleased and relieved when the other Libyan, Mr. FEMA, was sent home.
Can you give us a bit of detail, Susan, about what was cooked up at the trial? You're saying that it was basically a show trial. So in what way was evidence cooked up?
It was a ridiculous story. It was a ridiculous... Let me tell you what really happened in Lockerbie. And again, this is important because the CIA is continuing to generate trillions, hundreds of billions of dollars in off-the-books money for black operations, and everybody knows what black ops are. I don't need to explain that. This is operations money across the world, especially in the Middle East where we're seeing such tension and trouble. So we need to really get this under control, because this is the source of funding for the shadow government. Okay, but let me tell you what really happened on Lockerbie. There was a rogue team that, the CIA had legitimately believed that they needed to infiltrate the Islamic Jihad community, which was holding the Western hostages, 96 high-profile Western hostages, including Terry Anderson, the Associated Press correspondent, Jerry Levin, the CNN bureau chief, Mr. Buckley, who was the CIA station chief in Beirut, and Mr. Buckley had been viciously, savagely tortured. He was a political target of the highest value, and they beat him with chains and bricks. They electrocuted the man. They tore out his toenails. They did every possible thing that you could imagine. Jerry Levin has said that he was held locked in a basement, chained to the floor for 3 years with a bucket to pee in. I'm sorry to be graphic, but these were horrible situations. And the CIA believed that they needed to infiltrate the Islamic Jihad community in order to get the hostages out. The problem was, and this was already controversial because what they had to do, they made a deal with the devil. They had to agree to move heroin, but that's why they did it. Okay, I just told you why they did it, but here's what it required. They had to make a deal with the devil to move heroin out of Beirut, through Frankfurt Airport, through Heathrow Airport, and on to New York. And they had baggage handlers who would literally just, who were paid off to look the other way and move the right suitcases through on a periodic basis, so that the heroin would keep moving through this pipeline all the way through Frankfurt, through London, and into New York.
So, Susan, how did this enable the CIA to infiltrate into the Islamic groups then, this drug run?
Well, the Islamic Jihad group was using heroin to finance its war against Israel and to finance the civil war that Lebanon was fighting. And so, but what happened was even worse than that, because there was a rogue CIA team. And the CIA team included Oliver North of Iran-Contra notoriety and some other people associated with Iran-Contra. And they recognized that they were getting filthy rich off this for them in their own private bank accounts. Not all of it was going to the operations; it was also going to their own private bank accounts. Anyway, so what they did was they went rogue, and they began to warn. The purpose of the operation was supposed to be that they would infiltrate the Islamic Jihad, which is now called Hezbollah, and they would infiltrate them, and they would identify where the hostages were being held, And then they would go in and they would be able to call in a rescue and do a raid and seize the hostages, and they'd save the hostages. And this was how they rationalized it. When they went rogue, somebody began to warn the Islamic Jihad who was, when the Delta Force and the Americans were about to swoop in. So exactly at the moment that they were about to come in and save the hostages, they would come in, the Islamic Jihad would suddenly move them. And the American side would have to start all over again to find these people where they had been moved to, where they had been transported to. And this was a very dangerous operation. Every time somebody had to start over again, there was more risk of more hostages, there was more risk they would be killed. To put this in context, Terry Anderson was held for 7 years. Jerry Levin was held for 3 years because of this deception and this rogue agent. So the Defense Intelligence Agency, which also had a team there, reported to Langley. Sorry for this long buildup. The Defense Intelligence Agency called in the FBI, and they said, "We think we have a traitor who is profiting from the heroin, who's ratting us out to Hezbollah, and we need you to come in and arrest these people and get them out of our way so we can finish this operation." Well, the FBI did send in a team, and the team that the FBI sent gathered evidence of heroin trafficking, gathered money, and they were flying back on Pan Am 103 when the heroin suitcase was switched with a bomb, okay? And to be honest with you, I've been told this was done in Frankfurt, not Heathrow. I believe in good faith to Jim Swire that he is mistaken. I know he says it was done in Heathrow. It was not. It's my understanding it was done in Frankfurt.
Okay, well, to be fair to Jim, he was saying that there was a break-in, and so there is some evidence that it was swapped in Heathrow. What have you heard, and what's the veracity of what you've heard about it, the suitcases being swapped in Frankfurt instead, which was where the plane was before?
I've been told that the man who put the bomb on the airplane lives in the suburbs of Washington, 6 miles from my house. The man who did this was the nephew of Abdul, the famous terrorist whose name now escapes me. I'm sorry. It'll come in a second. And he lives in Fairfax County. He lives about 6 miles from the White House. Okay,
so who was actually on that plane then, and what were they about to do when they got back to the United States?
The people on the airplane that had to be killed off were the FBI team with the drugs and the money, the Defense Intelligence team that had filed the complaint against the CIA, and the deputy station chief of the CIA, who was flying back to answer charges against his team. And when you killed off those people, you killed off the knowledge base, the institutional knowledge that had assimilated that was capable of putting all the pieces together.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned Oliver North being involved in this, because, of course, he was one of the kingpins in the Iran Contra scandal, and also he was pardoned by George Bush Sr. What sort of operation was he running? And also, I wonder what you think about how the Lockerbie bombing then affected the way that these rogue elements within the CIA were able to thrive in the future.
Well, first of all, the nephew, the name of the man is Ahmed. There are 4 or 5 people who are key people. Ahmed Jibril, that's the name that was escaping me for a second. His nephew is the one who put the bomb on the plane. Ahmed Jibril. And what they did was they switched the heroin suitcase for the bomb. Okay. Abu Nidal has confessed. Abu Nidal was killed in a shootout in Baghdad with Saddam's forces, and he confessed, and his people, his family and friends stood by that story, and they insisted that he was the mastermind. And what had happened was that the rogue team had warned Ahmed Jibril and that crew that what the CIA was doing, and that the CIA and the FBI were onto the game, and they were going to shut it down, and everybody was going to be in trouble. So at that point, they knew they'd been busted, and then they took action to protect the secrecy of the operation. But everybody who did it has been protected. This is a very damaging. Why do we have? I think that it's self-evident why the CIA. Once you understand the truth, it's self-evident why the CIA has to stop this story from ever coming out. This is the beginning of a drug cartel at the CIA. These people have never been caught. They've never been prosecuted, and the CIA has continued right up to the current day to exploit drug sales, heroin sales particularly heroin, in the global market to raise operational money.
I suppose the other aspect of this, Susan, is that it's going to send a very, very strong signal to anybody that tries to do something to investigate or to bring the law to bear on people who are in the CIA or other Western intelligence services who are drug runners. This sends a very strong signal, doesn't it? The knowledge of what really happened at Lockerbie.
Yes, it does. It does. But it also the truth disparages good efforts by good people as well. Not everybody at the CIA is doing really ugly things, but you have a cabal of black assets who commit atrocities and really serious crimes, who then damage and cause what we call blowback on other operations, which might have legitimacy. And so, therefore, it always surprises people that you have this. We have our little intelligence wars where good people are trying to clean up and push out the bad people and push them back, so that good things can be done as well. And it's just a shame. I mean, it may sound naive to you, but as somebody who did Lockerbie, who did Libya for 7 or 8 years, I can honestly say that my operation directly with the Libyans, my back channel with Libya, directly stopped any war, any military confrontation with the United States for 15 years. I mean, negotiations and dialogue and diplomacy, even back channel diplomacy, are a tremendous tension release. It's a valve, a pressure valve. And if you can solve small problems on the edges, you can, even if you can't deal with the bigger problems, you can still relieve enough pressure that you can stop tensions from blowing out into full-scale war.
But you're painting a picture, Susan. You're painting a picture of a CIA nowadays. You're painting a picture of a CIA nowadays, which has been almost thoroughly infiltrated by a kind of mafia.
Yes, it is being infiltrated by a mafia, and that's dangerous. That's dangerous because, as I said at the very beginning, the United States Senate has passed laws. Congress has passed laws prohibiting any reports to Congress. I went to my own senator, Barbara Mikulski, and I reported on theft off the black budget and abuses of the black budget, and I received a phone call. I reported this to her chief of staff, and I received a phone call from the Capitol Hill police threatening me that I must never come back to Congress and report crimes off of the black budget ever again.
Susan, the victims of Lockerbie are just one of the aspects of the victims of all this, but of course there are millions of victims now in Libya. Libya is a failed state. It's in a terrible situation. I just wonder how that makes you feel, because you must have spent quite a lot of time in Libya and seen how it was before and how it is now.
Well, my work was at the United Nations, and what I saw was Libya at the time that I first contacted them was a deeply paranoid state like North Korea. They were convinced of the hostility of the Western world towards them as personally, and they were completely isolated. In 1995, early 1995, they were completely isolated. And so what happened was, over a period of years, we persuaded Libya to drop its guard and to trust the international community and come out and see we're not going to hurt you. We're going to be receptive and respectful. We're going to listen to what Colonel Gaddafi has to say, even if he gives a speech that takes 4 hours. We're going to show maturity in our dealings, and we're going to build some rapprochement that includes getting rid of terrorists, getting terrorists out of the country. In order to do this, we didn't just have the handover of the two men. Libya had to stop sponsoring terrorism as a whole, as a country. And this was a big deal. They had to deport those people that were already taking sanctuary in Libya, and so this was a very and they had to get rid of their weapons of mass destruction. Well, as soon as they'd done that, to me, it's just a tragedy because Libya had obeyed all the requirements that we had set down for them. Libya honored that. It was hard to get them to do it, too. They were so convinced we were going to declare war on them, we were going to bomb them. If they gave up their weapons of mass destruction, we'd come and send NATO bombs and NATO ships and attack them, which is, gosh, of course, exactly what we did. We make an argument that disarmament, our actions, cast very serious doubts on whether disarmament is a safe policy for these people.
But what about the situation, Susan? What about the situation over in...
Disarm. If I was talking to the Iranians, I would tell them not to do it.
What about the situation over in Libya, though? Because a lot of people have pointed to the fact that Colonel Gaddafi was not indebted to the IMF at all. In fact, he was starting a thing called the Libyan gold dinar, the African gold dinar, which was actually putting up a really a kind of competition. Really, the idea really being to sort of free Africa from the IMF debt.
Libya was a success. Libya was doing beautifully well. Libya had high literacy, great educational rights for women, job opportunities for women. How the West has destroyed this country is sickening. It is a complete. And it's a complete fraud to blame it on Lockerbie. One of the reasons that I came out so powerfully against the war was that I was determined that that Washington and London would never use Lockerbie as an excuse for NATO bombings. I just put a stop to that. I was like, this is just not going to happen.
Okay, well, Susan, just to wrap up...
You're not going to use Lockerbie to do it.
Which, of course, they did use it as an excuse, certainly in this country. Anyway, Susan, just to wrap up, can you tell us how listeners can follow your work? Have you got a blog? Where can we find you online?
My book, you can go to Amazon.com in Europe and check out my book, Extreme Prejudice, which tells the story of my work as an asset and then my later arrest on the Patriot Act and my imprisonment on Carswell Air Force Base.
Okay, well, your book is Extreme Prejudice. It's been a great pleasure to have you speaking to us in Bristol here. Susan Lindauer, thanks very much for joining us on The Politics Show.
Thank you very much.
And now Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers, maybe you'd like to comment on what Susan had said there, because it was almost taking the whole Lockerbie story on from what we heard from Jim Swire, the father of one of the victims of Lockerbie who lives in Gloucestershire here.
Yeah, well, if you remember, one of the things that we were discussing was the possibility that the bomb had gone on in Beirut, not at Frankfurt, and that it had been basically put on by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. That's Abu Nidal's group, the guy who died in a shootout with Saddam's security forces.
But it's fascinating that we've got people like Susan around, who was a key person at the time, has managed to survive all the way through it, has kept the knowledge base that many people have lost, and the people over the years have actually come to her saying, well, actually, I've got a little piece of the Lockerbie jigsaw. Yes, and I think there are, I listen to what she's saying. I mean, Abu Nidal and the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine General Command were a split off the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and there's quite a lot of evidence that they were in fact run by the Israelis. So there's an Israeli potential connection with them.
The take-home, of course, is that the official story about Lockerbie is patently rubbish, and it is patently rubbish because, of course, they were only implicated because of the so-called circuit board that was found at the scene, but they had to release McGrahy. Alex Salmond had to release McGrahy because a Scottish police inspector was going to testify at the appeal that the circuit board had been planted by the CIA.
But they were also linked through, I believe, the purchase of some clothes that were found in a suitcase on the plane by McGrahy in Malta.
But you think about this for a minute, and lots of people out there will have been on aeroplanes. Do you find it credible that a suitcase with clothes in surrounding a bomb goes on in Malta without a passport, without a passenger and without a passport, goes to Frankfurt, gets transferred onto a new plane, and then is flown to Heathrow and transferred again? I just don't believe that. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the idea was that these were bags that were scheduled to be taken from one plane to another.
As you well know, anybody who's travelled on an aircraft, passengers and bags are constantly checked to make sure there's no more the same passengers and the same bags are all linked. And in any case, just think of it logically. When a bomb goes off, there is no circuit board left. It's vaporised.
Okay, what's the take home from what Susan's been saying about the international drug trade, the heroin trade? Because one of the things which has come out since the invasion of Afghanistan, of course, and many would point back to Indochina and the Vietnam War as being largely about controlling opium crops, heroin crops, that sort of thing. What's the take home about what we were hearing there about Afghanistan and opium?
Well, the CIA have been involved in drug running since the 1940s. They were originally working with the Chinese nationalists to bring heroin into the United States to fund the Chinese nationalists. And the purpose of this, from the CIA's point of view, is quite simple. If you've got a slush fund that you've developed by allowing drugs to be run, then effectively you don't have to account for that to anybody, and it gives you money to spend. In Colombia, the popular movement in Colombia. I was over in Colombia on a trade union delegation a few years ago. They're all very well aware that the paramilitaries are all being funded through the drugs trade, and the CIA and the Americans are turning a blind eye to it. There's a new film that's just come out, a Hollywood film called Kill the Messenger, which is about the investigations by a journalist called Gary Webb into the whole Iran-Contra affair, because he uncovered the fact they were bringing massive amounts of cocaine into the United States through Mena Air Base in Arkansas, incidentally, which implicated the Clintons. And the film is about, right? It's not a full-on version of the truth. It's a sort of Hollywood version of the truth after all these years. But nevertheless, the essentials of the film are correct. And it was essentially pointing the finger at the CIA as major drug runners, not just any old drug runners, major drug runners. If you are the CIA, of course, you're in a strong position to be the kingpins, because you can take down anybody else that's the competition. And a lot of Mexicans believe that certain cartels in Mexico are being supported by the CIA, other cartels are being wiped out by the CIA. But anyway, the film is called Kill the Messenger, and it's a Hollywood film which is actually on release at the moment. So if anybody wants to go and get a basic education and all this stuff, then they should go and see that film.
And there's a very good book, of course, as well, called Dark Alliance by Gary Webb, all about that. It's called The CIA, the Contras and the Crack Cocaine Explosion. So in a way, what we're hearing is that these are the drugs of choice of the bad guys, aren't they? Heroin and cocaine.
Well, it's just the drugs of choice for people who want to make money, because they are very, very profitable, and
it's what that money's being used for. Is what I'm trying to say. Well, it's why I say the bad guys.
What the money's being used for is to fund, for example, Auto Unidas Defensas de Colombia, the far right paramilitaries in Colombia. And similar groups in around the world. I mean, a lot of these Islamic jihadi groups are funded by drugs, but they're actually being facilitated by Western intelligence services. And the important take-home for everybody listening to this, and with regular listeners to this show, is don't believe what you're being told in the mainstream media. If just simple internet searches will bring up, if you just put Iran-Contra into an internet search, a lot of information will pop onto your screen immediately. And basically, nothing has changed. In all these years, as you pointed out, Colonel Oliver North was not prosecuted, was not punished. He was pardoned by George Bush Sr., and he's now actually a chat show host in the US and a famous celebrity worth millions. So far from being punished, he's actually been promoted, and that's why nothing is changed in the way this world works.
Yes, we'll be hearing a bit more later on about why the death of investigative journalism, particularly TV journalism here in Britain. But you can hear all on your award-winning... We've just won an award yesterday, which is the Small Radio Station Award by the Radio Academy for the South West of England, that is, BCFM.
Getting bigger by being better. The number one choice for Bristol. This is BCFM 93.2.